For decades, Germany was Europe's undisputed economic miracle. The industrial powerhouse that bailed out the Eurozone, the export juggernaut that balanced its budget while everyone else just printed money. But the receipts just dropped. Official data confirms Germany is the only G7 economy to contract for 2 consecutive years, shrinking 0.3% in 2023 and 0.2% in 2024. While the US surged 14.5% above pre-pandemic levels, Germany managed a pathetic 0.5% over the same period. The miracle was built on a fragile foundation, and the illusion has shattered. Today, we crack open the real data behind the fall of Europe's largest economy, how catastrophic energy and fiscal decisions gutted an industrial base, how a massive social experiment fueled the rise of the right, and why a historic constitutional shift in Berlin suggests Germany is finally waking up. My name is Nick, and you're watching Coin Bureau Finance. To understand the sheer magnitude of this economic collapse, we first have to look at how Germany deliberately sabotaged its own industrial engine. And the primary culprit here is a staggering 2-decade-long energy policy failure. Think of the German industrial machine as a massive high-performance engine. To keep it running, you need cheap, reliable, and abundant fuel. For years, Germany had exactly that, thanks to a combination of domestic nuclear power and cheap piped natural gas. But starting in the early 2000s, German leadership made a series of decisions that effectively rigged their own economy to explode. It started with Chancellor Gerhard Schröder. In his final weeks in office in 2005, Schröder signed the highly controversial Nord Stream pipeline deal with Russia. And, surely by coincidence, directly after leaving office, he accepted a lucrative position at the Russian state-controlled company responsible for the project. This set the stage for a structural dependency that would blind successive governments into the geopolitical risks. By 2021, Germany was importing a staggering 55 billion cubic meters of natural gas from Russia every single year, making up over 65% of the country's gas imports. Now, I know what you're thinking. Relying on a single geopolitically volatile foreign supplier for over half of your core energy needs sounds incredibly risky. And it is. But in a sane world, a country would maintain a robust domestic backup system just in case that foreign supplier was ever cut off. Germany did the exact opposite. In 2011, following the Fukushima disaster in Japan, Chancellor Angela Merkel panicked. She completely reversed her own prior stance and announced a total phase-out of Germany's nuclear power fleet. At the time, Germany had 17 nuclear reactors providing roughly a quarter of the country's electricity. It was a stable, zero-carbon baseload power source that insulated the country from global energy shocks. And Merkel shut it down. The last 3 reactors, Isar-2, Emsland, and Neckar-Westheim-2, were taken offline in April 2023. So, you have a country simultaneously eliminating its domestic zero-carbon baseload and deepening its dependency on a single foreign supplier for 95% of its imported gas needs. It was an energy trap of their own making, and in 2022, the trap snapped shut. When Russia invaded Ukraine and the gas stopped flowing and the European benchmark for natural gas, the TTF, did the unthinkable. Prices that historically hovered between 15 and 25 euros per megawatt hour went into the stratosphere. On August 26, 2022, they peaked at an apocalyptic 345 euros per megawatt hour. The oxygen of the German industrial sector had simply vanished. The government had to panic print a 200 billion euro emergency package, a so-called defensive shield, just to subsidize basic consumption and stop the country from freezing. But the permanent structural damage was already done. And to put the scale of this damage into perspective, look at BASF, the world's largest chemical maker. BASF's flagship facility in Ludwigshafen is the beating heart of German heavy industry. But because of structurally higher energy costs, BASF was forced to shut down energy-intensive factories, including ammonia and fertilizer plants. They eliminated over 2,600 jobs globally, with the vast majority of those cuts hitting Germany directly. Production in Germany's energy-intensive industrial branches plummeted, remaining roughly 17% lower in 2025 than it was before the 2022 crisis. The country scrambled to replace cheap Russian pipeline gas with imported liquefied natural gas, or LNG, building floating terminals in Wilhelmshaven and Brunsbüttel. But LNG is fundamentally more expensive to process, ship, and regasify. Today, the typical industrial electricity user in Germany pays roughly 16.7 cents per kilowatt hour. In the United States, that number is about 7.5 cents. In China, it's roughly 8 cents. German industry is paying more than double the energy costs of its biggest global competitors. It means there is zero margin for error. And when your entire economic model relies on exporting heavy manufactured goods, double the energy cost is a death sentence. Now, before we connect these dots to the collapse of the German auto sector, the crumbling infrastructure, and the massive political rot, we need to talk about your financial safety. And the best way to protect your finances is to stay informed with unvarnished, accurate macro analysis. And that is exactly why you should subscribe to the free Coin Bureau Finance weekly newsletter. We break down the data the mainstream media ignores, and we give you actionable insights on what it actually means for your portfolio. You can sign up to the newsletter right now by hitting the link in the description or by scanning this QR code on your screen. It costs you nothing, but in a market running on outdated assumptions, it could save you everything. And now, back to the German collapse. When an economy is bleeding from self-inflicted energy wounds, the absolute last thing it needs is a massive, uncoordinated shock to its social infrastructure. But that is exactly what the German government delivered. Let's rewind to 2015. Chancellor Angela Merkel made the historic decision to open Germany's doors to people fleeing war, uttering the now famous phrase, "Wir schaffen das," or "we can manage this." The scale of the influx was staggering. In 2015 alone, actual post-registration arrivals of asylum seekers hit 890,000, with total easy system registrations topping 1.09 million. The federal structures were completely overwhelmed. The BAMF, Germany's migration office, collapsed under a massive backlog of applications. Municipalities were pushed into emergency mode, scrambling to house hundreds of thousands of people in military barracks, shipping containers, and school sports halls. The school system was strained to breaking point, with an estimated 325,000 children arriving in just 2 years, requiring 20,000 additional teachers. The financial cost was astronomical. The federal government's refugee-related expenditures soared, peaking at 23.1 billion euros in 2019 and hitting an astonishing 29.7 billion euros in 2023. Now, to be fair, the long-term integration picture does show some real progress. According to the Institute for Employment Research, 64% of the refugees who arrived in 2015 were employed by the end of 2024. This is remarkably close to the national average of 70%. But the structural strain on local municipalities, the acute housing shortages, and an increase in migrant-related crime left deep scars on the German social fabric. And when you combine a strained social fabric with a stagnating economy, you get a political earthquake. Enter the Alternative for Germany, or the AfD. Founded in 2013 as a fringe anti-Euro party that couldn't even clear the 5% threshold to enter parliament, the AfD seized on the 2015 migration crisis to reinvent itself. They capitalized on the genuine anxieties of the working class that felt abandoned by the political elite. They pointed to the high-profile security incidents, overwhelmed schools, and a government that seemed to care more about international praise than domestic stability. In September 2024, the AfD won the state election in Thuringia with 32.8% of the vote, the first time in the post-war period that a far-right party has become the strongest force in state parliament. And the voters didn't stop there. In the historic federal election of February 2025, the AfD captured 20.8% of the national vote. Let me repeat that. Nearly 21% of the vote. They secured 152 seats, officially becoming the second largest party in the German Bundestag. The political consequences that had governed Germany since the end of the Second World War was officially broken. The mainstream parties were forced into reckoning. The government lost all credibility, and the voters delivered their brutal verdict at the ballot box. But the political rot is just a symptom of a much deeper disease, which takes the form of a catastrophic lack of investment and innovation. For decades, Germany rested on its laurels, convinced that its precision engineering and world-class auto sector would guarantee prosperity forever. They were wrong. Look at Volkswagen, the absolute crown jewel of German industry. For decades, VW dominated the global auto market, using massive profits from China to subsidize its operations at home. But the Chinese market has fundamentally changed. Chinese consumers want highly digital, software-defined electric vehicles, and Chinese companies like BYD are delivering them at a fraction of the cost. In 2024, BYD delivered over 4.2 million vehicles, nearly matching VW's core brand volumes, and completely overtaking them in the Chinese market for sales revenue. The German luxury brands are getting slaughtered. Porsche sales in China plummeted by 42% in the first quarter of 2025. BMW suffered its steepest drop in over 4 years, with revenue shrinking by more than 15%. And the fallout at home is brutal. Volkswagen was forced to announce the elimination of 35,000 jobs in Germany, a full 25% of its domestic workforce. They are reducing capacity by 734,000 units across their German plants. Meanwhile, the supplier network is collapsing right alongside them. Bosch is cutting 13,000 jobs as they pivot from hardware to software. ZF Friedrichshafen is slashing its electrified drivetrain division by a quarter and considering selling off the driveline division entirely. Continental is spinning off its automotive supply business after cutting over 7,000 jobs. So the industry that directly or indirectly employs 1.2 million Germans is bleeding out, and there's no digital cash cow to replace it. If you look at the global tech landscape, the United States currently has 853 active unicorns. Germany has only 28. They completely missed the internet consumer boom, the cloud infrastructure boom, and they are lagging desperately behind in artificial intelligence. In the European Union's own Digital Economy and Society Index, Germany ranks a pathetic 21st out of 27 member states for digital public administration. Only 6% of German households have signed up for gigabit internet connections, which is 16 percentage points below the EU average. They are running a 21st century economy on 20th century fax machines. And the physical infrastructure is literally crumbling beneath their feet. Germany faces an estimated infrastructure investment backlog of between 400 and 600 billion euros. 1 in 3 motorway bridges and 1 in 7 federal highway bridges require urgent refurbishment. In September 2024, the Karola Bridge in Dresden partially collapsed into the river just minutes after a train had crossed it. Deutsche Bahn, the national railway once famous for its precision, reported an on-time departure rate of just 72.5% in the first half of 2025. The transport minister literally called it a form of, quote, state failure, warning that the public's loss of trust was extremely dangerous. And the reason for this rot is a uniquely German obsession called the Schuldenbremse, or the debt brake. Enacted in 2009, this constitutional rule strictly limited the government's structural deficit to just 0.35% of GDP. It sounds reasonable, it sounds prudent, but in reality, it was a financial straitjacket. While the US and China were borrowing heavily to build the infrastructure of the future, Germany was starving its own economy to balance a spreadsheet. They saved pennies while their bridges collapsed and their digital networks decayed. Which brings us to the grim reality of where this all ends up. If you look at the data that we just covered, it paints a picture of terminal decline. An energy sector dependent on expensive imports, an auto industry losing a price war with China, a society fractured by a mismanaged migration crisis, and a physical infrastructure that is falling apart. But here is the multi-trillion-dollar twist. The pain finally got so bad that the German political establishment woke up. In the wake of the February 2025 elections, a new coalition led by Friedrich Merz took power and immediately did the unthinkable. On March 22, 2025, the German parliament passed a historic constitutional reform, officially amending the sacred debt brake. They actually exempted defense spending from the strict limits and created a massive 500 billion euro special fund for infrastructure and climate investments. Yes, 500 billion euros. The fund allocates 100 billion to federal states, 100 billion for climate investments, and 300 billion for federal infrastructure projects over the next 12 years. It is the largest fiscal reversal since German reunification. They are finally opening the checkbox to fix the rot, and the pivot on defense is nothing short of revolutionary. After decades of chronic underfunding, the German government unveiled a record defense budget of 108.2 billion euros for 2026. They officially hit the NATO target of 2% of GDP in 2024, the first time since 1991, and they are now targeting a massive 3.5% by 2029. The German defense contractor Rheinmetall is experiencing explosive growth, pulling in a staggering 11 billion euros in new orders in just the first quarter of 2025. They pushed their total order backlog to a record 62.6 billion euros and are targeting 50 billion euros in revenue by 2030. So Germany is actively rearming and reindustrializing its military base. And they are finally taking border control seriously. Under the new government, Germany implemented strict checks at all 9 of its land borders. Between January and September of 2025, deportations increased by roughly 20%. And by the end of the year, they represented a 45% increase compared to the previous year. The federal police turned away over 18,000 people at the borders in just a few months. Asylum applications have plummeted to a decade low. The government is regaining control of the system, and the markets are starting to notice. The economic forecasts are actually turning positive. After 2 years of contraction, the German economy edged back into positive territory in 2025 with 0.2% growth. And for 2026, institutions like the Bundesbank and KfW are forecasting growth of up to 1.5%. The HCOB Germany manufacturing PMI just climbed to 50.7 in February 2026, breaking above the 50 threshold for the first time since June 2022. This signals that the brutal 43-month industrial recession might finally be bottoming out. And while Intel pulled the plug on a 30 billion euro chip factory earlier this year, the tech sector isn't completely dead. The TSMC-backed European semiconductor manufacturing company is breaking ground on a massive new facility in Dresden, securing the supply chain for the automotive sector and creating thousands of jobs. That said, the government can revise the laws, they can open the checkbook, and they can secure the border. But they cannot instantly revise the reality of 35,000 lost auto jobs. They cannot instantly revise the fact that energy costs are still structurally higher than in the US. And they cannot instantly revise the massive demographic cliff of an aging workforce. The recovery we are seeing right now is cyclical, driven by a massive injection of government debt. The hard structural reforms are cutting bureaucracy, digitizing the state, and out-innovating China are still ahead of them. The damage is severe, and the road to recovery will be measured in decades, not months. But the scaffolding of that recovery is finally in place. A massive infrastructure fund, a historic defense pivot, and a political establishment that is finally treating the crisis with the urgency that it deserves. So, the political consensus of a managed decline is dead, and Germany is not beyond repair. The consequences of this revival will be felt across Europe and across the world. But I want to hear from you. Do you think this 500 billion euro infrastructure fund will actually save the German economy? Or is it just too little, too late? And are you seeing the impacts of this industrial shift in your own investments? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. That's all for me today. As always, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. This is Nick, signing off.